think the biggest opportunity for software, and I've been in enterprise software now for 25 years, but I think enterprise software's probably been around for 50 plus years. Probably starting with IBM mainframes in the 70s and custom programming to start automating business processes. But I think a lot of enterprise software kind of under-delivered on the promise. And a lot of traditional enterprise software, yes, critical systems of record, obviously data every enterprise needs, but I think a lot of times it failed to deliver real productivity. And frankly, sometimes it's almost like CRM software. Tyler and I were for a long time. Sometimes even the sales reps felt more like a drain. And because there's more, a lot of these systems for the users were more like, oh, I have to feed the beast. Fill in forms, or even for doctors, right? Fill in forms with required fields, fill in lots of forms. Nobody likes doing that, whether you're a doctor or a sales rep, but there was really no real help to the user. Obviously, management always loved it. And the reason we did CRM in sales, if your sales rep quits or gets fired, right, the enterprise needs the data, it needs the records, you need the analytics, you need to be able to forecast. But the systems never really were that helpful. To really driving business outcomes. And I think that's the big change people are seeing in AI. You can actually drive an outcome, right? You can drive a better patient outcome. The doctor no longer has to take the notes. The system is fed for them. And I think in the enlightened world, they can just really focus on the patient. And same thing with the sales rep. They no longer have to fill in their CRM, put in their call notes. The AI does all of that for them. And the AI becomes more of a coach where it actually tells them, hey, I listened to your call. It can train the rep. How do you do your next call better? Who's actually the next customer you should follow up on? Because which one's most likely to close? So I think AI can really transform software from being kind of a necessary evil, if you will, a system of record that management and operations loves, but the users tended to hate, now to, I think, a delightful system where users no longer have to enter data, but they really have a virtual assistant that just helps them do their job better. And I think all of that is going to result in more money being spent on AI and software. And but also, I think, as Dan was saying, there's going to be winners and losers. And obviously, Dan's betting like your platform will probably grow and win, and you'll adopt AI. That's obviously your strategy, and probably true. But there's also hundreds and thousands of startups. Frankly, most of them, as always, will probably fail. You said you might actually hire some for talent, but it's going to be, and there will be a few new breakout winners. But I think, and I've also been in venture-backed startups, right? And that's probably no different, right? Most of them won't succeed. But I think there'll be a ton of innovation. And same with the incumbents, right? Some of them will adopt it like Dan and win, and others may not adopt AI fast enough and then get disrupted. So it's hard to know who the individual winning and losers company is going to be. Also hard as an investor. But I think overall the sector will grow a lot more. And I think the winners will do better than ever. So that's kind of the high level context. And Gavin and I did put together kind of our thoughts on what's happening in software industry. Before that, I just want to tell you a little bit more about myself. So I have been on enterprise software for 25 years now, and been involved either as CEO or executive chairman, founding 6 companies. We've had 3 great exits, and thank you to Tyler for 2 of them. Tyler Prince, good friend of mine, but he helped build the ecosystems at Oracle and Salesforce. And but over the past 25 years, we've built 3 CPQ software companies, Configure, Price, Quote. So that is for sales reps, and help them better generate quotes. And really all those companies kind of rode the wave of the cloud. And what Big Machines and SteelBrick did first was bring that kind of quoting software to the cloud, which when we started our first one in 2000, I remember was really hard because the internet was still really slow. Figuring our first company, Big Machines, almost failed. That's actually what brought me to Chicago. We started a company in Silicon Valley, and then 3 years in, we were almost bankrupt. And trying to sell cloud software to manufacturers in 2001 and 2002, 2003. You probably remember the dot-bomb. Even people were betting when was Jeff Bezos and Amazon going to go bankrupt. And if you read his biography, I think he's still bitter about it. But I had the same experience with Big Machines. In 2000, when we started the first year, everyone was like, oh my God, .com, so cool. When are you going to be millionaires, And a year later, it's like, when are you going to be bankrupt? So that was tough, but we persevered. And so ultimately built 3 winners. And Logic AI being the most recent. And that was actually our first, we started that company in 2020, but the idea was to do it in a more modern way, beyond cloud, start doing with AI. And that company did get off to a very fast start, and then ServiceNow acquired it. So that's been interesting. I'm also, my day job obviously is G2. And as Dan mentioned, we have the biggest software marketplace for business software. There's over 200,000 products and services listed. and we have over 3 million reviews. And our premise for G2 was always, frankly, not liking Gartner. Are any of you Gartner clients? No? Okay, we got one.
Embarrassing.
And my problem with Gartner, they have some good analysts, but I think that their model to me was always very lagging. And I experienced that where I remember our first company, Big Machines, it took us 9 years to get a Gartner report, and then 12 years to be the leader. And obviously, no entrepreneur wants to wait 12 years to get third-party validation. And I also thought it was bad for us as entrepreneurs and innovators, but also it was bad for our customers. I remember at Big Machines, eventually, we did sign up a company that made really big machines. Our favorite one was GE, GE Energy, and also our CFO, Alex Bradley from G2 is here, longtime GE alum. But I remember that was also a 9-year sales cycle to sell GE Energy. 3 years ago, we tried to build it in-house. And that was the problem we're trying to solve with G2 is how can we create, a better shopping experience for business software, help people discover the right apps. And we started about 10 years ago when SaaS was starting to boom. And Mark Andreessen said software is eating the world. And then we said that you need a buffet. And the other thing, like food, we said you need a Yelp. And because, I think we also thought the analysts were kind of like restaurant critics that couldn't eat the food. That's like the Gartner analysts sitting outside the restaurant. They're like, how was your meal? We're like, why don't we just ask the person eating the food? Yeah, the real user of the software. So that's always our premise. And all in all, it's come to life pretty well. We did become a unicorn in 2021, but as I'll talk about in a minute, now we're having to reinvent the business for AI because we built it probably more in a Web 2.0 SaaS way, and now we have to reinvent it for AI. And then when I'm not doing it, we moved out to Colorado during the pandemic. Our headquarters were G2 here in Chicago, but we love the mountains. So Gavin's that picture. He also has a twin brother. Our daughter Madeline, my wife Stacy. We do love doing things outdoors. This weekend I did do a 100-mile bike ride in Leadville, and I got a big buckle, which was really exciting. And you know what that means.
That is quite impressive. People don't know this. That is impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, it was probably the most painful and yet gratifying thing I've ever done.
Leadville 100, right?
Yes.
Yep.
The race across the sky. So that's what in my whole family, Gavin's also a big mountain biker, but actually my son's got me into it. So and in the winter we love skiing. So Clint and I also at least once a year ski together. This winter we're going heli skiing. Looking forward to that. And G2, as I mentioned, we have become the world's #1 marketplace. And the cool thing about software, it's a very global industry. There's entrepreneurs everywhere around the world. And I'm still an unabashed globalist. I don't like borders, especially for software, because tech can be developed anywhere in the world, can be used anywhere in the world. And I think the beauty of G2 is a very global marketplace. And you can find the best software, the best AI, no matter where the creator of the software is, no matter where the buyer of the software is. And I mentioned, now I'm an older entrepreneur. I remember when I started, I was like a young entrepreneur. It quickly happens. I think now I'm twice as old as when I started my first company. Now I'm 54. And now all of a sudden in like tech, you go to Silicon Valley and it's like, why aren't you retired yet? With all the good entrepreneurs are in their 20s. But regardless, I'm hanging in there. And one cool thing about being older, you gain more perspective on industry trends and waves. And I do remember the first one. This is actually me. I was born in Germany. Sorry, I bumped it. But my father was also an entrepreneur, but in pump manufacturing. And he was making heavy-duty industrial pumps. So I remember going to his office in the 1970s. He showed me his first mainframe. It was like, I remember it had all these memory plates. Literally, it was like physically big room. And it probably had like less power, certainly a lot less than your iPhone. Maybe like a calculator, but I think that's when it first started. And obviously you had to custom build accounting and all of that just to have any business computing. So that was like the 70s. The 80s, I remember that was me in high school, but I got my first Apple IIe. That was really exciting. I no longer had to handwrite my papers, type them. And then in the 90s, I was actually a consultant at McKinsey. That was my first job. But I also remember that was when Netscape, Mark Andreessen, launched the first graphical browser. And that led to that tremendous entrepreneurship boom. And actually, I went out to the Silicon Valley during that time. I went to Stanford Business School in 97, 99. That's when I first kind of drank the Kool-Aid about, online entrepreneurship. I started helping some other entrepreneurs. And obviously that whole wave led to this, boom and bust. Web 1.0, that's my wife, Stacy, got married in 2003. That might have been actually at the bottom when my company was almost bankrupt, but luckily she still married me. Gavin was soon born thereafter. And then I think what really made our business successful was the whole cloud and mobile wave. And obviously thanks to AWS, Salesforce, as well as mobile. So obviously mobile also is a great complement to the cloud. Also B2B software, where now sales reps could use mobile apps to do their quotes with our software. That's led to tremendous growth. And I think that's ultimately what made big machines and Steelbrick successful, was this growth of cloud. And now I think, yes, cloud mobile, but I think this is probably, I do believe it's the biggest one yet, this whole AI. I think we all remember, like, where were you when you first, and Dan, you talked about you first see ChatGPT. I think we were all like, holy shit. When 3.5 came out, I think it was November 2022. I think everyone was like, everyone, especially in tech, was like, wow, this could change everything. And I think we're still just getting started, and it is accelerating. Also talking to Vive before, I think he's not coding, he's not a computer scientist, but he also said, hey, the tools have gotten even 3x better since the beginning of the year, which is quite incredible. And so I do think it's going to change everything in the digital economy and lead to the reinvention of all software. And I think I've also used this slide at all hands, like, hey, there's such a big shift. And now the challenge, we have a little bit of G2. We're not a huge company, but we do have 550 million employees. Now we have kind of a $100 million legacy business, if you will. That was more Web 2.0. Also, investors are seeing this, like, it's all based on web search. Our original model was discover software through Google. We optimized for that. We did that very well. We became the number one destination for software. But obviously now buyers are going to shift. They're going to start at ChatGPT. They're going to start in Claude. And now there's this whole field you've probably heard of, generative engine optimization. Some people calling it AI optimization, answer engine optimization. But probably any industry, even if you're looking for a doctor, maybe you'll start ChatGPT, right? Like, who's the best physician in Chicago? Or certainly for software, like, hey, what's the best CRM software for manufacturer? I think that shift is going to happen. And so I think that means certainly also for us at G2, we have to reinvent and say, how are we relevant, if the software buyer starts on ChatGPT versus Google? And it creates all kinds of opportunities and threats for us. And I think really any digital software company that started before 2023, because you have an opportunity, you have data, you have customers, we have 4,000 customers, we have a good brand, that's all good. At the same time, we have to reinvent our software, our stack now for an AI interface. And what we're doing at G2, we're doing it across the board. We are reinventing our product. So we have launched a G2 AI site. Now, traditionally, we're G2.com. We're trying to imagine if we were a startup building G2 post AI, how would we build it? And one obvious thing, if the software buyer, we're going to guide them by prompts. And I think one nice thing about software buyers, they no longer have to know the Wongfish taxonomy of G2. And just like Gartner, we create categories. And people that work in software, we love categories, category creation. There's books written about it. So software marketers love that, but I think software buyers kind of hate it. They're just trying to solve a business problem. How do I get a business outcome? And the beauty with G2 AI, you can just ask it. And obviously, you can have context on you once you log in based on your LinkedIn profile. You can know your industry, your company size, your job function. You describe the business problem you're trying to solve, what outcome you're trying to get. And then G2 AI can recommend the best AI, the best solution. So I think it's going to make software discovery much better. We've always been based on user reviews and feedback, but we also realize it's always been a challenge. People never love filling in a web survey form. So we actually acquired a startup called Unsurvey earlier this year. And their vision was also to kind of take the surveys out of surveys. And you no longer have to go on a survey, you just have a conversation with an agent. And the agent interviews you. Hey, how do you like using Salesforce CRM? And what productivity are you getting? Are you using Agentforce? Are you getting the outcomes you wanted? And it's a smart agent. So rather than a web form, our traditional web surveys might ask you 37 questions about your CRM use. And nobody likes filling in 37 question survey ever. But also it's kind of boring and static. Whereas now with an agent, it's interactive, it listens to you like a really smart market researcher. And then so we have these long conversational transcripts, and we're actually getting, we're finding 3 to 10 times more words we're getting. And then AI can still parse it into structured data, into a structured review. So we can still compare software. So it's also really changing, how people can leave reviews, how they can find software. We have an AI research lead, Tim Sanders, who's also a Harvard Business Fellow, that's now kind of evangelizing to businesses. How can you use AI to power your business? And of course, internally, probably like every tech company, there's just so much internal AI productivity opportunity. And I think some of the most common use cases, we talked about coding with Claude. Obviously, we're encouraging, and our good engineers are all adopting it. And I think, Dan, you said that some of our mediocre ones aren't, but the good engineers, the 10x engineers are becoming 100x engineers with the coding assistants. Huge opportunity else for most companies to support. And at the core, we run on Salesforce Service Cloud, but we're working with a startup called Forethought that's helping us build agents. I think we're already getting over 80% case resolution. And now our challenge is just to get every customer and sales rep to kind of go to the AI agent versus traditional channels. But I think support is a huge opportunity. And I think over time, we can probably get over 90% automation, where humans are really only needed for really complex technical cases. Training, Hyperbound's one we're using for sales training. And sales training is always hard. And I think we used to do like simulated pitches, but nobody ever wants to do it. Now we make our sales reps, it's an agent that pretends to be the customer. And they have to kind of repeat the new product training with an agent acting as a customer, and the agent scores them. And not until they're good at pitching that new product do they pass. But I think, and that's just for, but I think it can be used for all forms of training. I think there's huge potential to really simulate, a real sales call, for example. Of course, we're using tons of LLMs. For our own product, we're working the most with ChatGPT, OpenAI, probably because at the beginning anyway, they had the best developer platform. Go to market, we're using tools like Gong for conversational development. We record all our sales calls and then they parse them. And one interesting thing like Gong does, maybe some of you use it, it also tells you how much you're talking versus how much the prospect is talking. And probably no surprise if you that studied sales, but the best sales reps tend to talk less. And even when I listen to Gong recording, I never listen to our team because it kind of color codes. I just want to hear what's the customer saying. Yeah, but they're calling that conversational intelligence, and with Gong now, it can also drive our forecast. And now, and actually, Mark Benioff talked about this like 10 years ago with Einstein, but I think now it's also with Gong really coming to life. And we have our human forecast still, our sales managers, our CRO, Eric, but we also have the AI forecast. And I don't know if you'd agree, Alex, but I think the AI forecast is starting to beat the human forecast. And so there's just so many amazing use cases internally that probably for any business you could use. And of course, in our feature marketplace, all our fastest growing categories are AI. And since the launch of ChatGPT 3.5, we've created 56 new AI categories. Things like vector databases that probably 4 years ago nobody cared about, but all of a sudden everybody wants to learn about. And so we're seeing in the products 119% over doubling year over year. All these startups are piling in with new AI products, and of course, all the incumbents are also launching their new AI product. So obviously tremendous growth on the G2 marketplace and everywhere else. And if you look at the software stack, I think it's also really changing with AI. And of course you have your infrastructure layer. And I think as we've all seen, certainly for investors, the biggest winner is NVIDIA, because at least on the AI compute chip, they do have kind of a hard-earned monopoly. Jensen's been at it 30 plus years. But it does seem like, right now they're obviously have tremendous economic power. AMD's getting in, even Intel's now, I think, starting to launch Broadcom. And obviously the hyperscalers, AWS, Azure, Google, Oracle now, plus Corey's actually going to get a $7 billion market cap. So there's obviously, and these players, it's probably more of an oligopoly. Because they're also, and Gavin will share more numbers, but they're probably investing $1 trillion in CapEx to build these AI data centers that are totally different from the prior data centers, and only very few companies can actually do that. Then you have the data layer, companies like Snowflake, and actually my friend Tyler was also the head of their ecosystem. And actually G2, we run all our data on the Snowflake data cloud or data lake. But obviously Databricks is emerging really fast. Scale AI, and you probably saw Mark Zuckerberg actually hired their founder for $14 billion. Alexander Wang, I've met him. We share an investor in Excel, but he paid $14 billion for one human. So he must be very smart. But their core business at Scale AI was actually kind of creating all the training data that all these LLM needs, and they still do that. So they're a core part of the data infrastructure, Pinecone. There's also lots of integration tools and pipeline tools to manage all your data. Then I think the AI model layer, and that one's obviously very well known. The tools like ChatGPT, Claude, Grok, and of course there's also Hugging Face. You might have heard of it, but there's probably like 100,000 different models now, all purpose built for different jobs. There's also very much the long tail of models for different jobs, and that layer is really growing. You have all the orchestration tools. And then at the top of the stack is kind of where I've always lived, the enterprise apps, the business apps that usually are the ones your users and your companies are interfacing with. And I think they're all also retooling now. Obviously, all the incumbents, they're all making massive investments in becoming AI companies and developing AI platforms and AI products. But then you also have all these startups. Even ChatGPT, obviously it's a model, but it can also be an app, right? And it's interesting, like Glean, very high enterprise search startup. But now all of a sudden, ChatGPT also has connectors to your Google Drive, all your enterprise systems. So maybe now it's going to do the enterprise search for you. That's also an interesting development where a lot of people, some of these are saying, oh, a lot of these startups are just wrappers around the LLMs, maybe even Cursor. And it embeds Claude, it embeds different models. And, do they have enough of a moat over the next 2 years, or will they get consumed by Claude and ChatGPT? And nobody really knows. There's also great purpose-built apps like Harvey. Our legal team at T2 is just rolling out. It's purpose-built for lawyers, and they have a ton of momentum. And so there's also obviously thousands of AI-first startups evolving in the software stack. And in terms of who's going to win and lose, like I said, it's really hard to predict. But you can make arguments either way. The incumbents, and Dan, you talked about obviously you're you have a huge customer base. You said 20,000 customers. You have tons of healthcare data. Your customers trust you, and that's the strength many incumbents have. Also, that's the strength like the Salesforce of the world are bidding on, right? They have 200,000 customers that trust them already with their customer data. So they have customer relationships. They have data. Gives them a unique advantage. Obviously, weakness of the incumbent is always already to be fast enough because these startups can code so fast and deliver. And that's kind of the arms race, right? Does like the better AI first interface and innovation win, or is it the customer relationships and the data? And I don't think there'll be one answer. It probably depends on the use case and the vertical. Healthcare, I'm guessing, is probably more going to favor the incumbents. It's like nobody's going to ever disrupt Epic, I don't think, for example. And then in some other verticals, it might be a bit easier. So TBD in terms of who's actually going to win. And I think one other additional shift is also the business model shift. And I think that's what made cloud so disruptive. And so you might remember there were companies like Siebel, around 2000, the hottest company, right, Siebel, but they're selling enterprise licenses plus maintenance. And then part of it is disruptive was cloud software, but also the business model shift. Because it shifted from, multi-million-dollar license plus the maintenance to, like at the beginning of Salesforce was actually cheap, right? It was like $65 a user a month on your credit card. And you didn't need the millions. And obviously now the next shift is with enterprise first startups. They're saying, hey, there's no seat-based fee at all. There's no fixed fee at all. Just you can pay me per the outcome. And so that could also be disruptive. And it's harder for the incumbents because now companies like Salesforce with 40 billion recurring revenue that Wall Street loves, investors will love. But the customer is saying, hey, I just want to pay per case resolution. How do these incumbents make that shift? And that might be the other lever the startups can use to win. Is this business model shift in addition to the technology shift. And speaking of Salesforce, Mark Benioff, he's very much an entrepreneur idol of mine. He's done an incredible job over the last 25 plus years building the global leader in CRM. And also obviously Mark more than anyone sees the impact of AI. And I think last year Dreamforce, I think it was like 2 weeks before the event, I heard from my friends that still work there, they had all these presentations and he like tore it all up. And he said, all we're talking about is agents and Agentforce. And I think ever since then, that's his bet and his commitment. And you can see here kind of the high-level architecture. Obviously, Salesforce has all the data. They already have the platform. They have all the customer apps. And now they're saying, hey, we're going to add the automation layer. And they're just going to try to convince their customers, you already trust me. It's safe. Just build your agents here. But obviously, he's not the only one saying that, because also if you look at ServiceNow, and they just acquired another company, Logic, but Bill McDermott's kind of saying the same thing. They're all also about agents, and now they're saying, hey, ServiceNow is like an AI platform. I think one advantage ServiceNow has versus Salesforce, they tend to own the CIO because their core business was ITSM, IT service management. CIOs love them and trust them. And in that sense, I think it gives them advantage because I think obviously traditionally Salesforce has owned the CRO, the CMO, but I think in AI, you probably want to own the CIO because they're going to be probably more influential in choosing the platform. And I think they have a data fabric also, where they're also saying, hey, we can manage all your enterprise data. We're giving you a trusted agent building and workflow platform. So just build all your agents on ServiceNow. And so it's a very similar pitch. And I'm sure they're both going to capture a lot of business, but like who wins, I don't know. Hey, we have to ask Quad. And also the VCs are betting that neither Salesforce or ServiceNow or any of the incumbents are going to win, right? That these disruptive AI first startups. And I hear about it from my board now all the time. My board So they invested in Cursor, they invested in Lovable, and every meeting they're like, well, Lovable, they grew from 0 to 70 million ARR in 6 months with like 6 people. Like, Godard, what are you doing? I'm like, I wish I was that good. But they're betting that a lot of these startups can win just through speed and innovation and more flexible pricing. And like I said, some of them will win, a lot of them won't. But you all are investors, you have to decide which ones. I don't know. I'm just an entrepreneur. And there are some of these startups that are interesting. And I'm actually lucky. I'm an angel investor in Gong, and I mentioned we're also a customer. And they started way back in 2016. I remember I met Amit Bendov, who's also an experienced entrepreneur. They're building out of Tel Aviv in Israel. But they've been an AI company now since 2016, probably early. And they started with conversational recordings, and now they're really positioning as a revenue intelligence company. We not only record all your sales calls, but as I mentioned, they give you an AI projection. They're driving your forecast. We're also using this now at G2. Next, they're trying to go into sales engagement, outreach automation. And I do think, and they had a very high valuation, but they may actually grow into that. And then there's all these new startups. I also angel invested in Clarify, and their founder, Patrick, he was a long time. He was a designer at Atlassian. There's another big enterprise app company. They're betting they can create an AI-first experience for CRM that's disruptive enough that people will, switch from a Salesforce. And their idea, they're calling autonomous CRM. But more what I mentioned earlier, their idea is like, hey, the CRM will actually qualify the lead for you, enrich the lead for you, and then as a sales rep, it'll tell you what to do on your next sales call, and it's just going to track your Gmail, your Slack. It's going to do all your pipeline updates for you, and you probably never even have to log into the system. It's behind the scenes. You can just text or Slack the rep in the morning and say, hey, call these 3 customers. Here's what you say to them, and then you make those 3 calls. It records them, fills in your call reports, updates your pipeline, tells you the next 3 things to do. And a lot of these startups are betting on it. They're not the only one. I think there's probably 50 startups trying to do this. And like I said, they have a good bet, but the incumbents may win as well, because the incumbents obviously also see this coming. And then I think Clint also asked me a good question. I built 3 CPQ software companies. We are thinking about starting a 4th one. Good prompt, but like, how would you build it today, AI first? And I do think now you can reimagine all layers of the software experience. Obviously for the users, and this is just some, but most enterprise software screens traditionally are sort of heavy, funky a lot. Like once you use them a lot, you kind of know, but they're sort of overwhelming. And I think the future vision, like I said, for CRM is probably more like a ChatGPT experience, right? Where your CRM talks to you, you chat back. Obviously you can chat by voice. Could just be mobile text interface. But I bet in the future, sales reps won't be logging into screens like this. They'll just be on their mobile, but maybe they won't even be on their mobile. There's these AI pendant companies now, one Limitless, started by Dan Stroker. So they're kind of betting, hey, you just wear this clip. It does all your recording for you. Maybe it also talks to you. Or I've seen people believe Elon Neuralink, just be a chip in your brain. And in some ways, it's a compelling future. Right? We all have laptops, and I've spent my life, like my shoulders are all like, why?
Bike 100 miles.
Yeah, or maybe it's a bike ride, but either way, I mean, we could be freed from our computers, right? Maybe by the time Gavin's my age, nobody has a laptop, nobody has a mobile device. Either we have a lapel pen, we have glasses with AI embedded that see the world, or we just have a chip in our brain, and we just talk to it, we just think. But I think I would doubt in 30 years we're all still typing. So I think it'll totally change the interface to be conversational and friendly. I also think on the back end, and this is very hard in CPQ software, a lot of our customers would go red at times, so it took them like a year to implement it because they had to deterministically put in all their product and pricing rules. Very painful. And then you have to maintain all that logic with deterministic programming. The data table's painful. And I think a future vision, you just feed in like, hey, here were all our successful orders. The AI just deduces, you don't have to write the rules. It just deduces what's a good quote, what's a bad quote. You load in all your data of your existing orders, the profitability, the margin, and then the AI just learns that and just makes recommendations to the rep by voice. And you don't even need the whole back end. No more deterministic programming of workflows and rules. And I think on the final layer, analytics, every software product also has analytics. But again, you traditionally had to pre-build dashboards to kind of say, hey, in the morning, you'll see what are my key reports, but then you had to look at them, think about it, tweak them, in the future, the AI, and this is another cool startup, Gravity Foundation, actually out of Boulder. I'm an angel investor. This is actually the ex-head of Google Looker BigQuery, and he's saying, this is an example of one of their real screens, they're just going to push insights to you. And his vision for me as a CEO in the morning, I just get, text, email, voice message from their system. They're like, hey, here's the 3 things you have to do. I look at all your enterprise data. They're creating 30 agents. He said it's like a virtual McKinsey team. Looks at all your enterprise data all night long and tells you in the morning, here's the 3 things you need to know. Here's the 3 things you need to do today. And so I think that's also going to be transformational. So I do think that's why there's this opportunity for startups. If you don't have any of the legacy screens, legacy experiences, you can really reinvent a whole new experience AI first. And then, Clint also asked me, hey, what's going to happen to labor in this industry? And I think, Ryan and Diva also talked about that. But I think overall, there's going to be tremendous productivity. And I'm also bullish on it for mankind, right? We all used to be farmers 200 years ago. And I think that's a good thing. Right now, we can produce all the food we need with 2% of the population. And then obviously manufacturing, same thing, right? It'll probably end up at 2% of the population with all the automation to produce all the physical products we need. And soon all the digital work will get much more productive. This is obviously from Goldman. And interesting, they said the #1 industry adoption, no surprise, information technology. And actually, I think they're way underestimating. They're like, it's a 30% adoption. But I don't mean a software entrepreneur that's not going all in on AI productivity. So I think they're way underestimating. But obviously, software, digital work, I think is going to be tremendously transformed because everything we do is all digital work, support, coding. I think we can really automate so much of our industry. And I think even 30%, I think is underestimated. I think, we could probably do at least 50% of the work with AI. And I do love this quote. I have to say to our team at G2, because also a lot of people are also afraid, like, what's to do my job. But I believe this quote, like, AI is not going to replace humans. Like, humans with AI will replace humans without AI. And I think it's exactly, I think Tom and Dan, what you guys said, you say the same thing with our coders, right? Our 10x coders, like my co-founder Wheels, he was always a 10x coder, now he's a 100x coder. So our best engineers, and they also naturally adopt the AI tools. And then sometimes you find your mediocre talent, they don't want to try the new tools, they don't learn them, and they might be stuck. And I do think that's whose job's going to be at risk. I think your below average knowledge worker that doesn't adopt AI, that's not innovative, doesn't want to change how they do things, I think they are at risk. But your best people are going to get much better. And I do think overall, and also this is the healthy pressure I now get from my investors, because they're saying the same thing. They're like, hey, these AI first startups, they're already producing 5 million ahead in revenue. And I think that's a healthy pressure we're going to have. Dan, you're putting your head down. Are you already 5 million per employee? I'm not.
We're at 10, but I think it's a risk.
You're at 10 million per employee?
I'm joking.
Okay. I wish. But I think we're all going to have healthy pressure now as CEOs, operators. We have to apply this AI to drive that productivity. And I think that's what the good companies are going to do. And this is also Goldman analysis just on the expansion of the markets. And obviously today, enterprise software is $350 billion. And this is they just broke down one example, customer success software, that customer service software today is a $29 billion market. And they're projecting by 2030, what's interesting, the legacy SaaS seats are going to decline. They're going to say there's going to be about 30% less call center workers due to AI. So the traditional SaaS revenue is going to decline from just under 30 billion to under 20 billion. But the opportunity they see is for those same vendors to have agents that now do the work. And the agent opportunity, in this case, they're saying 44 billion. So while the traditional TAM shrinks from 30 to 19, the new agent AI TAM is 44 billion. So overall, the market doubles in size. But all the growth is going to go to whomever wins the agents. And there's going to be pressure on those that don't innovate. Their legacy SaaS seat-based revenue is going to start to decline. And I think this is true in every category. But overall, I would certainly believe that there's going to be 50% more revenue in enterprise software. So 350 billion over 500 billion. But all the growth is going to go to the winners and the agents and the AI. And the legacy business is going to decline. And yeah, who's going to win and lose? Like I said, I can't pick the individual stocks. Also, I'd be a hedge fund guy. Maybe I'll join Ryan. But I think, the hyperscalers, it's hard to see them not winning because $1 trillion in CapEx and they're building these data centers nobody else can build. And it does seem like an oligopoly. They're not competing with each other on price. So, like I said, they're going to have great businesses. Are they overvalued or not? I don't know. But I think some of the incumbents that do use their data mode, they do add AI. They can add whole new revenue streams. But of course, some incumbents won't adapt. And I do worry sometimes about more like the private equity model. I think some of those companies may struggle. They're just optimizing for EBITDA. They tend to not innovate much. I think some of the private equity-backed companies may struggle. If they're just kind of, hey, let's just optimize legacy operations. But I think they're going to see decline. They're not going to innovate in AI. And I think in the startups, there will be new winners, but there won't be that many, right? There won't be that many IPOs, and software IPOs are rare anyway. Maybe it'll be like 5 or 10 really big IPOs a year, and then it'll be hundreds of startups. Well, most will fail. And even Y Combinator, they say it's the Harvard of startups. If they do 4 classes now of 200 startups a year, 800 a year, and then you get 5 to 10 unicorns. Even of all their companies, only 40% you can get a Series A. And then many will go sideways, or they'll be equity hired. And actually, running a big company, I want to actually hire more of these teams. You said this too, because they're great teams, but most of them won't be able to break through the noise. And so it's going to be interesting the next few years. And with that, I want to turn it over to Gavin, who's going to share a little bit more perspective on current valuations. And he's going to tell you which stocks to buy, right?
Thank you, Godard. So now we're going to look at the same stack we looked at earlier across enterprise apps, data, cloud, and infrastructure. These are only the public companies that we looked at, but we're going to look at their EV to EBITDA multiple, EV to revenue, revenue growth, and then the Rule of 40. And you can see starting off, we have the enterprise apps up top, and they have an average EV to EBITDA right now of about 33.76. And pretty interesting what I found, though, is that the Rule of 40 is right now below 40%. And you can see right now Microsoft is leading that. And what we're going to look at next is Microsoft actually is one of the biggest players investing the most amount of money into AI. So that is pretty interesting. And then data, of course, the only company that we looked at that was public in our stack was Snowflake. And obviously they're not profitable right now, but still interesting to see. They're still growing revenue at pretty crazy speed. So it's definitely interesting to see. And then next we have the cloud. And primarily looking at the cloud, you can see pretty much when we look at the Rule 40 for the cloud, it's really CoreWeave has just truly shot that up. Their revenue growth has been insane, and their stock's actually up 270% since they went public on March 28th, 2025. So that's pretty impressive in itself. And that really shows that there's a lot of hype built behind many of these different AI companies, even though they're just working for the cloud. And then moving down to the final segment, we're looking at today's infrastructure. And you can see, of course, we have NVIDIA leading that with the Rule 40 there, and right now they're at EV to EBITDA multiple about 48. So relatively pretty impressive. And then we have Intel as well, who are not profitable right now, and the revenue is going pretty slowly, but they're still putting a pretty good step forward. I still think they could be a bigger player in the future, considering the amount they're investing right now and how they're moving forward. So overall, I think it's just pretty helpful to lay out and just see how companies are currently valued in the AI world. So next, we're going to look at how much is being invested into AI by some of these more prominent market leaders. And on your left, we have hyperscaler capital expenditure, how much these guys have been putting and pouring into AI. So we have the 4 leaders. We have Google, Amazon, Meta, and Microsoft. And this chart shows from 2010 to 2024 their annual CapEx. And it's pretty impressive to see the phenomenal growth they've had over these years. And in 2024, they spent a total of $251 billion. And Morgan Stanley projects that in this year, 2025, they're going to spend a total of $325 billion. So it's really interesting to see these guys going all in. And a notable project too is Meta actually is investing $10 billion just into one single AI data center located in Louisiana. So it's pretty interesting to see them pouring this amount of money into these data centers. And then on your right, you have enterprise software and how much they're spending. So I laid out the spending and how much they're spending a bit differently than just straight up capital expenditure. Although Oracle, some do consider it a hyperscaler because of the amount of CapEx they're spending. They're still investing a lot in data centers. But I laid it out with CapEx, R&D, and M&A. And the M&A is trailing 12 months. And then the CapEx and R&D are just annual from 2025 for Salesforce and Oracle. And then annual for 2024 for ServiceNow. You can see Oracle spent a total of $31 billion. And that actually added up to about 54% of the revenue. Salesforce total close to $20 billion and significantly too above 50% of the revenue. And then we have ServiceNow, total of $8.74 billion, and that was almost 80% of the revenue. So it's super interesting and very amazing to see how much these guys are spending. It's going to be exciting next few years to see if this is going to pay off for them in the future. So next, we're just going to wrap this presentation up with just a bit of a bull and bear case across enterprise software stack. So this is the same stack we looked at earlier. And the bull case we talked briefly about earlier too. And I'm pretty sure everyone's here is pretty familiar with it. So across AI apps, that's like the incumbents and startups. Like Salesforce, can they roll out their agent force? Can the small startups build CRMs that people will adapt? And obviously there's going to be battles in between them. Only few are going to win. But that's the bull case. If these AI apps can fully roll out and be used to the customers. And then next, the model. So the models that we looked at, like ChatGPT, Claude, Grok, that's just if they can become an integral part to every company that uses them, if they can continue to get used in the amount of research that they do, and just really everyday, day-to-day life for many different people. Then, of course, we have AI data. That'd really just be one if proprietary data sets, like that we looked at earlier, could just strengthen and give the companies that have data the extra edge that they need to truly keep on growing. And then infrastructure, if all three of those go well, AI will keep on growing, and we'll see just more growth. Therefore, there'll be more data demand, more chip demand, and therefore just more growth in general. And that would be great for the infrastructure that these companies are investing. Then finally, just we're going to talk briefly about the bear case. And the bear case is a bit less talked about, but I still think it's plausible for a sense. So some of the words, they get a bit mixed up there. But for AI apps, what I imagine, like what would be a bear case for like a CRM, like a Salesforce or something, that would really come down to if, let's say someone like me, or I'm starting a company for years, I scale to the size, but what, like, it's like, why would I go invest and spend all this money for Salesforce when I could have a team of smart engineers with something like ChatGPT, something like Claude? They could end up building maybe like an interface, a CRM interface. Obviously, they wouldn't, like, you need hosted data in the cloud or something, but it is a possible solution. And even right now, you go on something like ChatGPT Cloud, you can have it build out like a pretty cool CRM interface in a matter of just 5 minutes. So obviously that's with demo data and stuff, but it's still super interesting to see and think about what it could do in the future. And then the bear case for models, especially something like ChatGPT, Claude, Grok, that would really be, in my opinion, if something like an open source model could end up competing with them. And what do I mean by that? Open source model, something like Llama, something that someone could download, fine tune the code to what they need, fine tune it's a task that they're doing, and have it just be better than an open source, or sorry, than their proprietary model, and they wouldn't have to spend a subscription. They could have a model that's tuned to themselves and could perchance be better. Although I think that's a bit far-fetched considering the amount of compute you would need in a computer, but I still think it could be possible the open source models do get better. And then AI data and infrastructure, that would really come down to the bear case in those, in my opinion, is if we start with smaller models and that are more efficient and they're cheaper to train. And there's actually a cool way you can play around with this. I don't know if OpenAI still offers it now that they roll out ChatGPT 5. You could use O1 Mini and smaller models that were actually trained with less data, and then you could compare it to a model that's trained with more data, and you could see that, oh wow, some of these responses are actually pretty similar. And if you look and do some more digging, they spend way less money, they train it with less data, and it's something that could actually make it so they don't need all this capex with these huge data centers, and they don't need all these just GPUs and compute. But so overall, I just think laying out like the bull and bear case across the enterprise software stack is very interesting. And overall, I think it's a very exciting time for me as a college student to be with AI and to be able to use it not only in school, but to be able to build stuff and just meeting friends, talking about AI and playing with it. I can truly realize that, wow, it's going to be my future. So couldn't be more excited, and I feel like I'm growing up in a great time right now. So with that, we'll roll into some Q&A.
Maybe one more comment to go on what Gavin said. Some people are worried about the younger generation coming out. I'm actually more worried about my generation. And we just had a class of interns at G2, like 15 of them. We had them do like summer AI projects, and they were so amazing. I think we're gonna hire all of them. Like I said, I worry more about my generation. But I think that generation, they're growing up AI native. So it'll be interesting.
Is there anything going on in China? I mean, I know there is, but sort of, I'm struck by the complete U.S. dominance of your entire presentation. That maybe what it looks like. But you know, do you see China? Do you see Europe doing interesting things? Will the U.S. continue to dominate?
I do think globally it's the US and China, but frankly the enterprise software market, and none of my companies, and I feel like we can't enter China. It's obviously a closed garden to Western companies. And so that's probably why it's excluded, you know, from our perspective of the world. I mean, obviously, I think we've all heard about DeepSeek. You know, and I do think China, they are investing a ton, but it does feel like it's kind of two separate markets now, right? 'Cause China intentionally is obviously their whole internet is a walled garden. I also think their AI is, so we are competing with them, but probably not directly. And I also think most Western companies wouldn't buy software, you know, from Chinese companies. There's too much distrust. And I think so that's, I think, why it's excluded. But I do think, and I don't know much about it, but obviously everything you hear and read, I do think they're certainly, I think it'll be a strong competitor, you know, in terms of, but they're gonna build their own AI. It's gonna be separate from, you know, what we use in the West. I do think Europe, a little bit happening, but not actually. There's a German startup. I'm from Germany originally. Was it N8N? You might have heard of it. It's cool AI infrastructure. They're out of Berlin. They just raised $1 billion. So there's a few in Europe, but I think it's mostly the U.S. and China.
This is a question for Gavin. Tell us a little bit more about how your generation is using AI. I'm close to how all these old knowledge workers use it, but tell us more about your workflow and how your friends are using it. I'd just be interested a little bit more.
So first I'll start off with school, just because like that's like when I first started using it myself, and I first started like seeing peers and classmates use it. So I go to CU Boulder, and like obviously people started initially using it on essays. People like teachers would assign an essay, and you could just write in that full essay that might be better than we could do with ChatGPT or something. And since then, like teachers have actually been assigning less essays in my opinion. We've been doing more kind of verbal stuff, like maybe you're speaking more or something. But I think moving forward in the future, essays are going to die out. But like as far as kind of like how the school and schoolwork goes, I mean, for me, I find it's been a great tutor. I don't have to go to office hours anymore. I don't need to go to a peer tutor. If I have a question about something, I can really just ask them online, and they'll give me a better answer than they might even give. So, huge time saver. I can now do more, learn more, and I think overall it's just truly enhanced my productivity. And then kind of more about how I use it kind of in my personal life and how I use it this summer at Colorado Capital. I mean, I really use it for everything I do. I would say like any research question I have, I'll first cross-check 4 different LLMs, see what different answers they have. Then from there, maybe ask Google, see what articles pulls up. So I mean, really cross-research and stuff, it's really just been phenomenal. And I mean, I do believe that like without it, I'd be able to do way less than I currently do, honestly. So I've just been learning a lot and just playing around too with some friends. So.
You've also started doing some vibe coding, right?
Yeah, I've also explored a bit with that, like learning Cursor, using Claude. I mean, I'm just making some small websites and seeing what they can do, but it's still super interesting to be like, wow, I just built a website in an hour. In the past, like I would have no idea how to code. It's kind of like what Gavin talked about. Like it's truly phenomenal. So.
You actually did that for our Leadville mountain bike race, because Gavin, his brother also wrote it, my wife came, but he created like a whole web support website. Because I kind of put it in a Google Doc, I'm like, here's all the information you need when we're going to be at different aid stations, and Gavin vibe coded it, and he turned it into a cool website in like 2 minutes.
All right, the last question here for Godard and Gavin. Anybody have? There we go.
Another question for you. Sorry.
And the next generation's gonna.
When you look across those 4 LLMs, is there a tool that consolidates those answers, or how do you consolidate those answers, and then what's that next step after? So you're going across the 4, are you basically just using it as research to see what's out there, or are you taking that and say, hey, what do these 4 LLMs tell me on a 5th LLM, using that information? Like,
Yeah,
what's
so
your
if we
process?
go back to the one slide with the spending. So I did actually the same thing with this chart. So I mean, obviously looking at the SEC from all that data, but the M&A stuff, that was a bit harder to find. So what I would do in that example is I would go and I would ask Claude, Grok, Gemini, and ChatGPT. I would ask them, can you tell me that like all the M&A transactions, Salesforce, ServiceNow, Oracle have done over the past 12 months, and tell me the value of them, and then I would really just compare and contrast. I would see, okay, Claude and Grok said the same thing. I'm probably going to dig deeper in there because they said the same thing. I'm going to see what sources they use. But if like Gemini goes and says like Salesforce did like $1 billion, I'm probably just going to ignore that and just go then effectively with what the 2 models said. So I'm going to really just
find that by using one LLM, you have pretty consistency in terms of the credibility of the data, right?
Yeah.
And that's why you're doing this.
And then from there, like they'll give me an answer. I mean, I'm still going to obviously check where that came from. It's just sometimes
ChatGPT still using it. It's still using crazy looking numbers. So, but yeah, I mean, it's really just cross-referencing, seeing the answers come out. I think it just overall makes it more accurate and just quicker too. So.
Thank you guys very much. And one last thing, like if any of you, I'm not connected yet, but I do love LinkedIn, so feel free to connect and we can continue the dialogue.